Well, that was easy. All right. Hey, what's going on, guys, and welcome to One Road. Today in the shop, we're replacing a set of hub assemblies. These guys right here. Now, this hub assembly is exactly where your brake rotor and your wheel attach. If you look at it from the back here, it begins to make a little more sense. This portion right here actually contains the bearings, and you can see the backside of one of these bearings right here. And you can also see this triangulated design here. There's 3 bolt holes, and this is what attaches this hub to the knuckle. Here's the old hub assembly I'll be replacing, and you might think it looks a little bigger, and that's only because this hub assembly is still attached to the knuckle. If I flip this thing up on its side, you can see the bolts here that actually attach the hub to the knuckle. Now, it's a weird name, I know, but this whole thing, this whole big giant chunk of metal here is what we call the knuckle. This knuckle is basically the support system that holds the hub, holds the upper and lower control arms and the steering linkages. This thing does a lot. So in order to remove this hub, we have 3 bolts we have to deal with. And thankfully, here in the front, they give us 3 holes to access those bolts. So all we need to do is turn this to line it up with the underlying bolt. And once we do that, we can now put our socket in there, and the socket will reach all the way through and lock itself onto the bolt. If you've ever driven down the road and heard a weird groaning sound coming from the front end of your vehicle, well, it may be something like your tires, but it also may be your wheel bearings or hubs. Let me give you an example of what this failing hub sounds like here on my bench. Now that sound you hear there, well, that's bearings grinding inside of this thing. That is not good. This is a failing hub. Now, thankfully, there are other ways to check your hubs to see if they're failing. One of those ways includes jacking up the front end of your vehicle and spinning the tires by hand. And as that tire goes around, you may be able to hear this weird grinding noise if your hub is failing. Now, always make sure to check in your owner's manual or with a professional technician before you do anything like that, as using a jack can be dangerous and you need to know exactly where your manufacturer recommends that jack to be placed. Now, I'm going to be using this air impact wrench, but it's probably not recommended to use something like this for these bolts. I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing the recommended method would be with a breaker bar like this. I'm going to go ahead and slot this 15mm socket down through the hole, locking it onto the bolt. And I'm not just going to hold this thing down, I'm going to hit it a few times. All right, and with any luck, the bolt will come right out. Now, I've already taken out the 2 bolts that also hold this dust shield, so I'll set this aside. And there's one left, and here we go. And just like that, we have all 3 of the bolts removed. Now this hub assembly should slide right out, and it does. And this is it. You know, if I'm not mistaken, it does look like some heat has been gathered here. This metal is definitely miscolored. And that, my friends, is what a hub looks like from 1995. One thing I am noting on this hub is these bearings that the factory installed are by Timken, and they're made in the USA. Now, I went ahead and prepared the surface here before I placed the hub, just to try to get rid of all the big chunks of grease and grime and dirt. And I'm also making sure I put this new hub in exactly the same orientation that the old one came out. We do have a wheel speed sensor here, so you want to make sure it goes in the same spot, which for me is right about there. And you don't want to forget this dust cover, and you also need to make sure this goes in the same orientation, which again for me is right here. With everything placed in the correct positions, I'm going to go ahead and install these bolts, and I'm going to use some blue thread locker just because. And according to my manual, I have my torque wrench set to 19 foot-pounds. Which is right there. I don't know, something about that 19 just seems a little weak for me, so I'm going to go ahead and bring it up to 25. Makes me feel a little bit better. And honestly, I think that's it. The one thing that threw me off is the torque spec on these 3 bolts that torques the hub down to the knuckle here. As far as I could find in the manual for my specific vehicle, the torque spec here was 19 foot-pounds. Now this is for a 1995 GMC Suburban 4-wheel drive. I don't know, it just seemed like they were a little bit tighter than that when I was taking them out with my air impact wrench, but maybe that's simply just because they were kind of rusted in there. So again, probably not recommended, but not only did I use some blue thread locker, I also increased the torque here on these to 25 foot-pounds, and even that seems a little bit light to me. But I really think that this nut here that holds these CV axles to the hub and vice versa is really where the torque is going to be that kind of holds all of this stuff together. So maybe it does make sense that these bolts only really need to be at 19 foot-pounds. Nonetheless, I put mine at 25. All right, well, as I always do, I double check my work to make sure that I am doing things correctly, and it's something we should all do. Never trust just one source of information. Always try to get it backed up. And I tell you this because that book that said 19 foot-pounds on these 3 bolts that hold in the hub, that just didn't sound right. You then saw me torque it to 25 foot-pounds, but even still, I felt like that wasn't right. It just didn't seem like enough. Being that this is a hub, this is what holds the wheel onto the car. And yeah, I know that CV axle nut is going to do a lot of the clamping force to keep it all together, but still, that hub, I knew it needed more than 19 or 25 foot-pounds. So I got on the internet, spent about a half hour searching forums and different websites for the answer. And weirdly, this is one of those situations where no one really knows. It seemed like most websites just listed random torque specs, except for one. I found one that said 133 foot-pounds, but you know, then again, it was just a bunch of random different torque specs. So I had an idea. I called a Chevrolet dealership, and after getting transferred around a few times, I finally was able to talk directly to a tech. This guy, while I was on the phone with him, looked it up, and he said 133 foot-pounds. I, of course, reiterated just to make sure we were talking about the same bolts. He knew exactly what I was talking about, and he said that whatever he was looking at was stating 133 foot-pounds for these 3 bolts. So that's when my mind went back to what I saw on the internet, which also said 133 foot-pounds, and there I was, confirmed 133 foot-pounds. Now that makes a lot more sense to me. And so what I'm going to have to do is back out these 3 bolts that I torqued to 25 foot-pounds, but also use that blue thread locker, and we'll see how that goes, and then retorque them back to 133 foot-pounds. Now the tricky part here is, you see, I'm doing this here on my bench. Normally, this knuckle would be still attached to the vehicle. Unfortunately for me, that's not the case. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get 133 foot-pounds here on my bench. So because I'm very curious about that blue thread locker and just how that's going to affect, you know, removing this, it's only at 25 foot-pounds, but there's blue thread locker. So I'm going to try with my breaker bar here rather than with the impact wrench. I just want to see how tight it feels with that thread locker. Oh, okay, yeah, that just loosened up right away. Okay, that was no big deal. So that one was easy. All right, we're gonna try this again. See if we can't get up. Yeah, okay, no big deal. All right, I, for some reason, was thinking that that thread locker was gonna make this extremely difficult to remove, but it seems like, let's see if we can confirm that with the third one. Yeah, okay. And just out of complete curiosity, I want to see what this blue thread locker looks like once dried. And there you can see it right there. It's just a little crusty. I don't know if I maybe just didn't use a whole bunch or if that's just the way it looks, but you almost can't tell that there was any thread locker on there. I've now cleaned up all the threads and I can reinstall these bolts. Well, like I was saying, the only way I'm going to get that 133 pound-feet of torque onto these 3 bolts is, well, by mounting it to the truck. And so that's what I just did. I went ahead and temporarily mounted this to the truck, and hopefully this is enough to hold everything in place while I crank down on these bolts. Okay, so because there's 3 bolts, I don't want to just put 133 pound-feet on one bolt and then move to the next and then to the next. What I'm going to do is go about halfway on each bolt, and then I'll come back and go the rest of the way on each bolt again. So I have my torque wrench set to about 65 pound-feet of torque, and I'll go ahead and apply some blue thread locker again. And now I will screw in this bolt by hand. I will set my torque wrench, hopefully, because everything is loose here. I'm doing a major renovation on the front end of my truck, so I'm hoping This will allow me to crank down. Okay, so that's 65 pound-feet. That was fairly easy. Move on to the next. We got the next bolt out. We're adding our thread locker. Pop this bolt back in. Okay, and we are going to 65 pound-feet. Just like that. Now we're doing our last bolt here. Thread locker. Here we go to 65. Perfect. Now I'm going to take my torque wrench and set it to 133 pound-feet. It's 130, 133. Okay, we're going to come back up to this top one, and we will attempt this. Here we go. There's 133, there's 133, and there's 133. And because we just want to be sure, we're going to go back and double check them. All right, and that, my friends, is how to replace a failing wheel hub assembly. Well, all right, in this video, you saw what a hub is. You saw how to remove an old hub from a steering knuckle. I showed you what the steering knuckle was, all on its own. We got to see what this brand new shiny hub assembly looks like, and we got to see exactly how to install it. So I truly hope you got something out of this. If at the very least, I hope it was entertaining for you. If it was, don't forget to hit that thumbs up, and also don't forget to subscribe if you're not already. You can always check me out on Instagram at OneRoadGarage, and I also have a website at www.oneroadgarage.com. Well, thanks again for watching, guys. I am Jimmy for One Road, and I will see you in the next one.